Welcome to another episode of Real People, Real Stories, where we provide you with compelling tales from everyday people just like you. I'm your host, John Wendell Adams, author of the novels Betrayal and PayBack, along with the soon-to-be-released novel, Ruthless. You can always find me by going to john@johnwendelladams.com. So for the next 23 minutes, let's get to today's guest.
It really resonated with me to be somebody that creates value in people's lives. And so through business, that's what I was doing, whether it was for them personally or their team or the company that they work for.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, John.
How are you, man?
Doing great.
All right. Yeah, it's great to see you, man. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. I'm telling you, right?
Yeah.
Jeez. And you look great. You know that, boy, the
I do what I can. I tried my best.
There you go. Well, I love that beard thing, man. I mean, all the years that I've known you, I've never seen you with that. And now the last couple times I've seen you, it's been there, and shoot, it looks great.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
For our audience, if you would please just tell us your name, what part of the country you live in, and what you do.
Well, I'm Brian Pedersen, residing in sunny Southern California, San Diego, that is. And what I do is I help operate a software business, software as a service, and we help companies deliver amazing search experiences to their customers. So we help configure search engines and make them great for them.
The thing that I'm excited about talking to you about is this whole notion of how you have transitioned from this whole notion of business to missions, and how the two have really intersect for you. The thing that I guess I want to ask you, I want to back up a second. I really want to hear from you about how this whole thing began associated with missions, because that's been a desire of yours. And just tell me how that whole thing started.
When I was about 19 is when I first got to know about Jesus and became a believer and started that whole journey. And it was really about 6 months in that I started to hear God speak to me, and I didn't have any paradigm for that. It wasn't anything I had heard of before and realized after the fact. But about 6 months in, there was this question inside my heart that was burning, and it was, "Who am I to you?" And it was this type of question I couldn't shake, and I needed to get an answer to it. And what ended up happening is I left my home, I left San Diego, I left college, I left my job, and was determined to get an answer to that question, and led me to move overseas for a period of time. And that's where everything got started. I got to experience a new culture, new people, many new cultures actually, and really fell in love with that. And I think just the curiosity to meet new people and hear their stories and learn how they live, and that was all happening while I was, learning about God.
Well, I appreciate that. And what's interesting to me is, in spite of the fact that you have this real compelling desire associated with missions, that you found your way into business. And even before you tell me about that, there was an experience that you shared with me about sort of walking in the park in the middle of the night, and something happened for you. Tell me about that as well.
Fast forward a couple of years since that trip I was just talking about. I was graduated from college. I had moved from San Diego to Chicago. I had met you at this point, and I was in my first job out of college. I was working at a staffing agency as an administrator, and all I wanted to do was be a missionary at that time, but I needed to pay the bills. And so I saw work as like a means to an end. Like I'll put up with this for as long as I need to. And at some point, God will call me on the field is kind of how I saw things. And so I've been working in business referring to this experience you mentioned for probably a couple of years. One night I was frustrated with how long this process was taking before I was going to get called to the missions field. And I went for a walk in my neighborhood and had one of these experiences where, God did it a few times in the Bible, but he said, look up and what do you see? I just saw all the stars. It was a nice clear night and there was about 1 million stars out there. I couldn't count them. And I just remember looking up and I was like, God, I see more stars than I can count. And what
Right.
I heard back right away was, that's how many people in business don't know me.
Wow.
It was a really interesting response because it all started for me with a question of, who am I to you? It was this knowing, getting to know God. That same response, it felt similar. Like I want them to know me. That was a perspective change for me at that time.
In spite of all that, like I was saying earlier, you found your way into business, right? Knowing what was deep in your heart. And yet, like you said, having to pay the bills, you found your way into business. And that must have been, some things about that were challenging. Some things about that were inspiring, encouraging. I mean, talk about that whole business aspect that you faced as you were walking through that.
Business and my work was probably one of the most, productive fields of God working on me. And so there were so many challenges. Some of these you'll remember, John. There was a period of time, almost a year, where there was a coworker that just had it out for me, was trying to sabotage everything I touched, tried to fire me. That's happened a few times over the years, but it's really been a setting where I've worked out a lot of the things that I would read in the Bible or would pray, through prayer and just getting to know who God is and who I am in him. It was, a lot of this stuff was worked out in the business context. And so apart from like marriage and relationships, it's the other like major learning ground for me.
As you went through those challenges, there were also some things that were really fulfilling for you in that business context. What can you tell me about that?
It's people. It always comes back down to that. I enjoy people. I enjoy building relationships and getting to know people. The type of work that I was doing in business and in sales, you're meeting with people, on a daily basis. You're building relationships. So I enjoyed that, getting to know them. But it really resonated with me to be somebody that creates value in people's lives. And so through business, that's what I was doing, whether it was for them personally or their team or their department or the company that they work for. I'm just like so determined. Okay, how do I create and deliver value to you?
In that context, you were making a difference from a business standpoint, dealing with people, really trying to affect them positively, but you were making a difference from a financial perspective in terms of numbers, quotas, et cetera, et cetera. There was some real success that you were realizing. How did you feel about that?
I love winning. It's fun. More of my background is a competitive athlete. I like competing and I like winning. In the sense of sales and quotas and revenue and numbers, I enjoyed producing. I also, early on, actually, this was probably the I don't know if you remember this. The first year I was working with you, God was actually speaking to me about revenue numbers that we would be hitting in the future. And I remember writing all these things down and sharing them with you, and they happened. So God even was thinking about these numbers.
I have to tell you that I've had a long business experience, Brian, yet I have never encountered a situation like that where there was some bold speaking associated with business, sales, revenue, accomplishments, aside from that time. I mean, that was really significant for me as well. I guess what I want to ask you is, with all that going on, you then made the decision to really accentuate this thing of missions and, literally move your family across the world. That must have been a real transition, and I want you to spend some time talking about that.
Yeah. We as a family have lived by this, this saying that we make ourselves available to God first. That's how we order our lives. And an opportunity came up in our local church here in San Diego where they were going to send a team to go start a church in South Africa. And they asked us if we would consider joining that team and helping do that. It's a long story of how it all happened, but we were able to pull that off while still having my job in business and take that remotely to South Africa. So yeah, we embarked on a massive transition. My wife was 6 months pregnant when we moved.
Wow.
And I was in a somewhat of a leadership role, leading a sales organization in the company that I work for, and moving to literally halfway around the other side of the world, in a new culture, new place. And we were going to start a church from scratch.
Wow. Well, that's super ambitious, right? There's a couple of questions I really want to ask you about how the two started to intersect, this business and missions. But what was really your role as you moved into this missions responsibility? And what, in your mind, was your true, I guess, desired outcome?
In a lot of ways, it felt like an experiment. We didn't have real clear understanding of what it would be like. We'd never done it before. And the team that we were on had never done it before. Went in just very open and very watchful of just how we could be used. I think my personal expectation was I would just make disciples. That made sense to me. That's honestly like what I did. We just made disciples. And as that continued, we put a little bit more structure around it with meeting in homes and then having a larger gathering at a point.
I have a question for you about how business and missions really started to intersect. But before I get to that, when you touched ground in South Africa, that first week, month, 3 months, etc., what was going on in your head relative to what you were thinking back to that time in the park, looking up at the sky, at the sky and seeing the stars and asking that question? I mean, did any of that come back to mind, or the things that happened when you left San Diego and started that trip around the overseas and such? I mean, talk about, did you get off the plane and go, oh man, this is exactly what I was looking for? Or was it like, what did I just sign up for?
It was both, very much
Okay.
both. I think more than any other period of my life, I felt like I was in the most alignment with how I understood what my purpose was.
Sure.
They blended so well together. Having a mission with people to help build the church was very meaningful to me. But you have to engage with the community, and I believe you have to add value to the community, serve them, and be a part of it. And so business for me was that made sense, where I was making friends and meeting people, and I was got involved at a startup incubator, one of the largest ones in Africa, actually, as a tech startup incubator. Got a hot desk there to work from, was helping teach founders how to give them like a basic sales process. Ended up meeting with CEOs of some of the largest financial institutions there, be a part of like pitches for, if you've seen Shark Tank, sitting on that side of the desk, listening to pitches. Sure. And it's just a lot of really fun experiences and a lot of rooms I never expected to sit in. But there I was, and the presence of God was there too. I have some crazy stories of God intervening in these meetings. It was an incredible alignment though, for both those things.
I'm probably going to ask you about one of those experiences you encountered. I want to ask you this question. You go to your boss and you say, hey, guess what? I'm moving to South Africa. And the response that you got about the potential of being able to take your job, the business, and continue to do that within the context of South Africa. I'm just wondering how that whole conversation went. And there's probably people that are listening to you right now thinking, he's working in San Diego, picks up and moves to South Africa, takes his job with him, and somehow he conveys that to his boss. Talk about how that transpired.
I think I had a great approach. Before I took the job, I said, this is probably going to happen. Are you okay with that? So it was kind of a stipulation of taking the job. They were okay with that. Probably a story for another time. I don't know if you want me to go into this, but there was so much complication around actually pulling it off when it came time, because I was in the role for, probably 18 months before I moved to South Africa. And it was a crazy journey to pull it all off, but we got there and thankfully, while I was there, saw a lot of kind of parallel results in the business and in the church. And
Wow.
it just worked out really nice because I was doing the exact same things in both settings.
Wow.
So making disciples and building relationships and, selling, to me, has always been the exact same thing. Like, it's
Got it.
building relationship, it's listening to people's stories and how can you help them. The business doubled while I was there, which was amazing. And the church went from like nobody to, we had an established church on Sunday mornings that was having about 100 or so people come every
Wow.
week. It was an incredibly fruitful time, and it was a lot of hard work, a lot of hours, but I was having the time of my life.
That's great. But the one thing that I heard you say that seems to me to be the real catalyst in terms of the conversation that you had with your boss is the fact that you kind of laid that out from the beginning. So it was really no mystery when that started to come up, right?
They had agreed to it. The logistics were challenging to figure out, but the intent was laid out from the beginning, which felt important for me to say that before taking the job.
I guess what I want to ask you is, with all the things that you described, and I'm going to ask you about, give me one kind of situation or circumstance that transpired that really let you know, hey, I am in absolutely the right spot. I mean, those results are amazing, going from 0 to over 100 people and going from wherever you were from a financial perspective to 200% of that. I mean, those things are phenomenal. Any CEO or boss, et cetera, would love for that to happen. And, I guess any missions organization would be clapping their hands about that as well. But you talked about that incubation scenario before, but, the people part was really important for you. So give me an example of how you built a relationship that sort of carried on and carried through your time there in South Africa.
I think for me, I carried a vision for South Africans that I believed was from God about who they are and what they're called to. I was looking for people that I could see like this is for them. And so I would meet with business leaders, and I would share. I would pretty overtly, when it's, still being like, pretty smooth about it, but I would share with them like what they're called to and how business is critical for the fulfillment of the Great Commission, business people.
Great.
And it was just incredible how that deeply resonated with some people, some very influential people. It created like a commonality between us to have relationship and friendship.
Right.
And some of them became part of our church community, some didn't. And we just, had kind of friendship outside of church. And it didn't matter. That was probably the big theme that I carried in my heart for people. And there was one story in particular that it just really stood out to me. I was with one CEO of a very large company there, and he introduced me to the head of, I think the like second largest investment firm in South Africa. So I'm with these two prominent guys, and while we're talking, this like book title comes to my mind, and I just shared it with the guy. You ever heard of this book called Business Unlimited? He just like, I'd almost floored him. And he goes, yes, I have. And he goes into this whole story about, his calling in business. And he'd just become promoted to the CEO of this company, or of a previous company. And he was like in his prime, like in the thing that God called him to. And then one day he like wakes up and has an encounter with God, and God tells him to leave and resign. Major surprising change. And to make a long story short, part of the process for him ended up being like having this dream about this book called Business Unlimited. And God spoke to him through that. And it just really kind of set the course for his life. And bringing that up in that meeting, it kind of bonded us in a way and created some common ground for us to, I guess, just have favor with him and have some friendship with him. But it's amazing how God shows up in these business settings. Happens all the time.
That's great. And you know what, for many people, and I would, guys, but I think for women as well, but certainly for guys, there is this sometimes hesitancy to just be forward with the things that, come and are placed directly on your heart, either for you to speak out or do. I don't know, maybe you felt like, well, hey, you know what? That's what I got. That's what I'm given. And then the result is what you just described. I mean, what was that like for you? Did you feel some hesitancy, your heart beating like a rabbit, or you were just like, oh yeah, I got that. Let me give it to him.
I used to be terrified, but there was one time in Chicago meeting with somebody at a large medical device company that you know of, John. Had a first meeting with this guy who's a director, and during the meeting had like a pretty vivid vision of him. And that one was like, I was sweating through my suit. I was like, this is either, I'm just going to share this because this was really like, this was kind of an obvious encounter. I'm like having a business meeting and I'm seeing this whole scene of this guy's life. And I just went for it. Thought, okay, well, this could go really bad or this could go good. And ended up being a scene from how he spent his previous summer in Kenya, helping like start education facilities for kids there. Right. And he was just blown away. He was like, how do you know that? And I was like, well, I just felt like God showed me that. And he just wanted to encourage you that he loves that about you. And you're where you need to be. I mean, this is a business meeting, man. We're talking about hiring people and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know, that's just the kind of the way it's been over the years. So.
All right. So you're back now. You're back in San Diego. Your family's there. You're working for the same firm. You're still really about speaking these things that come into your head and your heart. The question I want to ask you is, what are your aspirations at this point?
When I was in South Africa, I felt like I got some vision for kind of like the next 10 or so years of my life. Up until a few years ago, most of my adult life, I would say, was all about preparation. And at some point in the last few years, that had seemed to transition into building. And so I'm in this kind of building phase of my life. And I feel kind of similar to maybe like Noah, where there's like this thing coming in the future. You don't really understand it. And you need to build something to prepare for it. So that's what I feel right now, and that I'm doing, and it will probably result in some type of like foundation or fund to help strategically advance the kingdom with finances and sure. with business and church planting and all sorts of things. But that's what I'm working on. It very, very little baby steps. Like we'll see what happens, but that's kind of those are my aspirations right now, is to just continue doing the basics of like spending time with God and loving my wife and investing in my kids, showing up to work and believing that this is something that God's doing and kind of watching him unfold it with me.
Right. And that's a tall order, what you just described, all those elements you just gave me, but all in good and proper time. I mean, I get the impression that this missions journey to South Africa, and by the way, we didn't really say where you were in South Africa.
In the Western Cape, about 45 minutes from Cape Town.
I'm kind of digging back through the things that you said. I really wanted to ask you, were you in the townships, or were you in an actual city, or both?
We were in a city, and all cities have townships. So they're there together. As we were making disciples and starting the church, that was a big decision, and whether we were going to like have the church facility meet in town or meet in the township. And it was advised by every church in town to not do the township. We were leaning towards the township, and this I won't go into the details, but it was confirmed in some pretty extraordinary ways that we were to start the church in a township. What we had at that point was a community of maybe like 30 to 35 people meeting in our house, one of our houses, every Sunday. And they're all white Afrikaans, in town, relatively wealthy. And when we decided to move into the township, that was, for some of them, I don't even think they'd ever been in a township as adults. Sure. And we didn't lose anybody. It was crazy. They all ended up coming, and we did no church advertising, no marketing, nothing. It was just like word of mouth, I guess. We'd have people rolling up in like really nice Mercedes Benzes into the township.
Right.
Like, what is going on? And
Right.
these really prominent business people started showing up, and it was probably 50% white and 50% Kosa, or Afrikaans and Kosa. A real opportunity. And we really felt like what God is doing, what he's going to do, and what he wants to do with the people of South Africa has to be done together and not separate. And so we didn't and do not have the answers for how that was going to take shape, but we could listen to God and do what he said along the way and let him kind of figure that out.
Just a point of clarification, because there may be listeners who don't really understand this dynamic. I mean, when you talk about the township, this is really areas where it's largely, as you said, Kosa, but from a U.S. perspective, these are Black Afrikaans.
Black Africans, yeah.
Right.
Afrikaans is a people group of Dutch descent.
When you're talking about these folks that were rolling up in these luxurious automobiles, these are white Afrikaans who were coming to the township, to where it is that you and your team really felt, based upon your leadings, you should all be meeting together.
It was the kind of thing that would bring you to tears to see, because the whites over there, like most of them just either haven't been into a township or don't go. They don't feel safe. They don't feel comfortable. And there's just so much history, bad blood and violence and extreme discrimination. And so it is palpable, the tension. We're kind of this somewhat neutral third party mediating a place for people to worship together.
Got it.
And be one in Christ and figure it out.
Brian, I got to tell you, now I understand why it is that I just really felt this leading to sort of back up for a minute, because when you were really talking about this thing, because I really want to get to like your future aspirations and things that you might want to share with someone else, but I'll get to that in just a second. But I think the reason for why I really cycled back to that one is because you were really talking about these places where you really felt like God was leading you, and the relationships and the conversations. But a large part of this was, as you were saying, you have this affinity to people, was drawing together these people groups so it is that they could start to really break down walls and build relationships with each other. It seems to me that was a key critical part of what it is that you and your team were doing.
Yeah, it was. Absolutely.
And so without you responding to what it is that you really felt was being placed in your head and your heart, you may not have done that.
Yeah, it's looking back, I'm glad that we were making big decisions based on how do we keep ourselves most available to God. That's kind of like the thread that goes back to, I'll take this job if I can work anywhere in the world.
I mean, you now have gained some very important insights and some learnings that you didn't necessarily have before. You piled your family in a plane and flew to South Africa. And you've talked to me about what your aspirations are, but I have two questions for you. The first one is, do you feel like that experience was really the foundation for your aspirations as you go forward? Or do you feel like, well, hey, John, that was just part of the mix? Do you think that has helped to really solidify the rest of the story? I know I've asked sort of a two-part question, but it seems like those two things are somewhat intertwined.
Maybe some people understand their life, at the beginning, like maybe they feel like they understand what God's called them to. For me, it seems to be the deeper I go, the more is revealed to me, the more I understand, the clearer it becomes. And so going to South Africa was, in a way, it felt like the pinnacle of what God had called me to, but what it ended up doing was just opening up the next chapter of something I never saw coming.
There's probably individuals who are listening to you tell this story about sort of this intersect between business and missions, and the stories you told about South Africa and the cities and townships and people coming together and what your aspirations were. What would you convey to someone who may be walking down a similar path?
One, I think that we are living in the times of Joseph from Genesis in the Bible, where there's people that are moved into places of high influence, that their hearts are aligned with God. They live a righteous life. They're put in these positions of influence in business and government. And when the world is in chaos, they're bringing order and they're providing for people, like more than just like you. I mean, it could be your neighbor, but in that story, he was providing for nations. I think that's the time that we live in right now. And I think that God is calling business people to get right with him.
Yes.
And to follow him, and to be in these places of great influence and to steward wealth that is for kingdom purposes. And I think that we will look back and see what a critical role the business people played in the Great Commission. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say, to really simplify, and this has just been kind of my process, like the longer I walk with God, the more simple it becomes, which is really nice because it's just nicer to have things be simple and less complicated. I've kind of distilled my life with God down to just a couple of things, and these at least help me feel like I'm on track despite like what all these like high stakes things I'm involved in are. And
Sure.
So I distill it down to like abide, listen, and obey. And so remain connected to God, stay connected, stay in that intimate place of spending time with him and getting to know him and being known by him. Have your ears open, listen to what he's saying, and then just do it.
You shared that with me before, and I absolutely could not agree with you more. Abiding, listening, and obeying, man, that just is so critical. And what you've really done by answering the question in that sort of the two-part consideration is, one is sort of a bigger picture. I mean, it includes lots. I mean, you think about business people, period, that they do have power and they do have influence, and really trying to think about how they take that power and influence and where they really optimize it. And I think that's what you're getting at. And then for the individual who may be a business person or not, is that abiding and listening and obeying really is to help each person really be as grounded as possible in whatever it is that God and Jesus are really communicating to them.
Keeps it pretty well aligned.
Yeah, and alignment is it seems to be an important ingredient. Brian, I got to tell you, I mean, I could do this with you all day long. Really, there's so many real nuggets, stories, suggestions, recommendations that just continue to flow out of you. I really am just thrilled listening to the transition, what has transpired in your life, how you've made no distinction really between the thing that you believe God is calling you to and this business proposition. I can't wait to hear and to see how the rest of the story for you, Brian, unfolds.
Appreciate that.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you, if you would please consider, as time goes on, to come back and join us again. I'd love to.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I'd love to hear. Yeah, I'd love to hear whatever else it is that's happening for you as this whole plan starts to unfold. You and Joseph sort of walk down the road here. So I really want to thank you again for coming and joining us and being a part of Real People, Real Stories.
Happy to be here, John. Thanks so much.
All right. Have a great day, man. You can always find me by going to john@johnwendelladams.com.